We are at the Museum of Graffiti, and this is our second anniversary weekend. It happens to be Art Miami, Art Basel Miami. It's a big week for Miami. It's a big week for us, and so we have introduced new works this week to the public in the museum. And one of the new pieces that we've introduced is this room, which is a mural by Chilsky from Miami and Arrive, aka Seam, also from Miami. And they are writers and b-boys and DJs. There's triple threats. And so we invited them here to do this wall as a way to honor those sort of triple threats in our movement that were so important because they gave so much to this culture and to this art movement. And so we have some of those men here today, and that's who we're surrounded by. The images, they drew these men and women around us so that we could talk about them and so people could learn about them. And so it's very important for us to honor and acknowledge the people in our community that gave us so much and that helped spread this art form around the world. And so today I'm sitting here with Popmaster Fabel and Bill Blast. Both of them came into town from New York City to help us celebrate this occasion with us and are sitting with us today to be able to give us some history and some context to what we're seeing, because this is so coded or so maybe unknown to so many people. And so I wanted to bring in some experts that live it and actually are on the wall. So on my right, there is a young Popmaster Fabel right on the wall, and behind us is the Eye of the Tiger mural, a recreation of it, originally painted by Bill Blast in 1982, if you could believe it, a long time ago. And so welcome, guys. Thank you so much for visiting us and spending some time with us here and partying with us and getting to see what we do here at the museum. And so my first question is to you, Fabel. How were you introduced to writing culture? When did it happen to you, and how did it happen to you?
Thank you, Ket. Happy to be here. I have to say the Museum of Graffiti is amazing, right? And I'm honored to be part of this exhibit. So I grew up in Spanish Harlem on 123rd Street and between Lexington and Park Avenue. Spanish Harlem had a lot of legends in terms of writers, like Part, came out of there, Vulcan, a few other people. But on my block in particular, there was a gang called the Savage Samurais, who became the biggest and most notorious gang in Spanish Harlem from 73 to 79. They wore patches, like most gangs, in New York at the time, similar to like biker style. But these guys were dancers, and they were also graffiti writers. So the Supreme President, DT, his government name is David Tull, and his brother Michael Tull had a crew called Soul Writers Incorporated. So David Tull would write DT 123, or his brother Michael would write Lion 123, and there were other guys down with the group. So when they weren't necessarily gang busting, that's what we called it. West Coast calls it gang banging. Gang banging for us is something else, right, on the East. But when they did their graph and all that, they went under Soul Writers Incorporated. So at the time, DT 123 and Killer were competing to king the inside of the Six. So that was my first initial inspiration, was just the guys from my block and the neighborhood, walking around and seeing pieces of Part and, and other people. And then in 1977, I met Phase 2 because my sister started dating this guy, Arnaldo Cepeda, from La Familia de Cepeda, Bomba en Plena de Puerto Rico, But you know, he grew up in the Bronx, and they went to NYU together, and they started dating. And he happened to be a DJ. He went by Fly T, for sure. We call him Tito. And he took us to one of his rehearsals with the group he was down with called the Wicked Wizards. The Wicked Wizards consisted of Fly T, Phase 2, aka Lonnie Wood, Cool Pat, and Raymond R. the Superstar. So we went to Betances in the South Bronx. Tito took my brother and I was like 12 years old, 77. That's when I met Phase and saw them DJing. First time I touched 1200s. They taught me how to cut I Can't Stop, you know. And Phase 2 was there, and I started flipping through his, and mind you, I didn't really know who Phase 2 was. I was only 12, you know. At the time, I wasn't really conscious of like the heavy hitters and the architects of it. But flipping through his sketchbooks, I was like, man, this guy's amazing. And so obviously that rubbed off on me. And even my tagging style, because he had a fantastic hand style. Lonnie Wood, God bless the dead, right? Phase. That was a heavy, heavy influence for me. And then a couple of years after, I wound up at Art and Design, 1979. I was in Art and Design, High School of Art and Design from 79 to 83. And once I got to Art and Design, it was like hip hop high, you know? A bunch of writers. The first writer that, I met Wiggles there. He wasn't even Mr. Wiggles yet. He was Rek, R-E-K. And I was Pacer, P-A-S-E-R. Well, I am Pacer, and he is Rek. You know, we have aliases, right? My official homeroom, the guy that I sat next to, is Albert Popa, a.k.a. Conan, who at the time was the king of the seven train, you know, after Fuzz 1. And I learned a lot from him. We became buddies. You know, he sat right next to me, and the minute I saw him, his hands were full of ink, his pants, and first day of school, and I'm like, I know you right. And of course, you know, we kicked it. He taught me all the racks and queens. We were smashing it, you know, me and my twin brother, Punk Rock Pete, and Conan, we became very close friends. And Conan was inspired by Fuzz 1, you know, with some of the style. But Fuzz, at one point, I think, lived in the Bronx. That's why he went to Queens with all that flavor. And then little by little, I started meeting a bunch of other writers, you know, of course, including, you know, Bill Blass. But there was a long list of writers that inspired me, including Doze. You know, his style, I loved his style. There was a guy that no one talks about who wrote Omega. You know, this guy was kind of a doofy guy, you know. But, you know, Tack, Airborne, you know, K's, like Ernie Pays, the way Vart, Sizer, Days. Days' last year was my first year, so we overlapped.
So these guys are guys that you encountered in high school. What about on the dance side? How did you get into the dance? That's the graffiti thing, but
right.
It comes together. How did it
right.
come together?
So the Savage Samurais were also into outlaw rock. They did up rocking, but like very aggressively. So I already saw like, wow, this is like a whole culture here, you know. And they made their own patches, you know, their colors, handmade. You know, it was all like DIY. You
and
know.
So when you say outlaw rock, you're talking like top rocking.
Up rock, like it was called rock dance, and then eventually it was called up rock, right? So top rock is more associated with before you break,
right?
You're top rocking,
right?
You don't necessarily battle. When you battle top rocking, you take turns. When you battle up rocking, you go at it at the same time, kind of like capoeira. You're right there, you know, both throwing burns at each other or what have you.
And so you were seeing that in your neighborhood?
Yeah, I was seeing it with the Savage Samurais, right? So they were dancers who did graffiti.
But on the streets or?
On the streets.
Got it.
So my building, I lived right next to the building where the Supreme President lived, DT. They lived more like in a tenement. I lived in like this 6-story housing development that was made like overnight, because we were being displaced from other tenements in the neighborhood, so a lot of people wound up there. It was called Upaka Gardens, but mind you, there was no garden there. But there was a plaza, and there was a twin building on 122nd Street, and in the middle of that there was a plaza, and that's where I would see a lot of stuff going down. And so our apartment had a view to the front, 123rd Street, and then it had a view to the back as well, to the plaza. So you would see it. You would see whenever DJs would go out there and spin. To get specifically into how so I used to top rock, up rock a little from watching them and trying to copy the steps, but it's not, I wasn't heavy into it. So it wasn't until I went to art and design, Wiggles and I became tagging partners. And we started, doing motion tags first, etc. And then he was already b-boying and top rocking a little. I was top rocking a little. And we both fell in love with what we called electric boogie at the time in New York, which is kind of a bastardized term for popping. It's, because that started on the West Coast. Popping and locking started on the West, but of course, through Soul Train and certain individuals who made their way to New York, it started to sort of become another popular dance among us in the hood. So Wiggles and I both started popping or doing electric boogie more or less at the same time that we were writing, and then I am Pacer, but then I chose another name, Fabel, as a tag, Fabel, F-A-B-E-L. And then when Wiggles and I started to get famous with our dancing in the street, like ghetto celebrity status, I added the Popmaster. So as Popmaster Fabel identified me as a dancer. And then Rec, which is Wiggles, Stefan Clemente, Rupert, AKA Scene, Black Scene, went to our high school as well, and he gave Mr. Wiggles one of his names, Mr. Wiggles. So that was originally Black Scene's, I only say Black Scene because there's a Richie White Scene, the Italian one, to differentiate.
And there was another dancer you used to do shows with at Art and Design.
So there was Crash, Black Crash, right, not Johnny Matos. So Wiggles, I won't get into, but he wasn't at the school anymore. At one point, he left, right? So I started teaching this guy, Antonio Glass, God bless the dead. He was murdered like a year ago in New Orleans. I taught him how to pop and lock a little, and we were doing all the variety shows and the talent shows, and I taught him, how to blend colors and airbrush and all that, and he ran with it. But specifically, it was common back then in our culture to partake in different disciplines. That was a common thing. You had dancers who DJ'd, or you had MCs who did graph, like Mr. Chic, He's a perfect example from the Meme Machine, right? Echa pa'lante, echa pa atrás. I spoke with him recently. And you have Peso, from the Fearless Four, who rhymes and was hitting the trains. You feel me? So for us it was all inclusive. Anything was game. We were competing to see who's the flyest in anything, even in how you dress. So fashion played a major part in it as well. We weren't just buying something and throwing it on. Anyone could buy a Lee suit and Pumas, We were flipping things, you feel me? Like even before Puma started doing the exotic colors, we would, for instance, buy navy blue Puma's Clydes with a white stripe, and since we were already artistically inclined, we would mask off everything and paint the stripe baby blue. We started that, and then they caught on, and they were like, "Wow, let's flip our sneakers with these flavors." So it was, like I said, man. Any way that you can be the flyest, you did it, and so you did cross discipline. You indulged in different components of the culture.
So with that, Bill, you met Fable in high school.
In art design.
In art design in high school.
Yeah.
What?
I remember.
Not from the same neighborhood. Here you have Fable from Spanish Harlem. Yeah. Where were you from? And
I was from Spanish Harlem too. I used to live in the right next to La Maqueta, and used to have a lot of live animals there and a lot of gangs over there. You know, I remember the Black Unicorns.
Right.
They had a big motorcycle gang, and they were always in the neighborhood. You know, and then I moved over to the west side, where Douglas is, and that whole area was violent too. We had a lot of gangs over there. They actually filmed The Warriors over there, you know, and that one scene that they were in the clubhouse was filmed right up the block from where I lived. But you know, I started bombing my hallways and, you know, doing a lot of work in the hallways, and then I started venturing out, doing pieces on all the local schools. And then when I went to Joan of Arc, they gave me a studio there, so I was able to do some very big paintings, and, you know, was blessed with a couple of grants, you know, so I was able to do some projects with the kids. And, you know, for me, it's always been like our community. You know, we stuck together a lot because we were always in the back of Rocksteady Park and practice our moves. And, you know, I remember Ken Swift every day, you know, practicing a whole bunch of turns and stuff, and Frosty Freeze jumping over the fence right off of a swing and just land on the fence and then do another flip, or right off the fence. I mean, the guy was fearless, you know, and then hanging out with those all the time, you know, laughing and, you know, doing art. We were piecing our whole neighborhood. That school.
So when you mentioned Joan of Arc,
Right.
Is that the school in your neighborhood?
Well,
What school are you talking about?
Right. That was one school, but all the schools. But where Rocksteady is, we bombed that place. I mean, this was on a handball court. So, you know, from painting trains and doing that scale to go to this scale was like supersized, you know, to blow up an image this big. And, you know, I always thought of like when you're in a battle, how, you know, you're going at each other. So I chose this image to represent that feeling of that intensity of people battling it out, you know.
So in this image, you know, it does have that intensity with this animal sort of coming at you, but it has also a chain.
Yeah,
and
because
it has beads. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
yeah, well, Zulu Nation, you know, was we had Zulu kings in our neighborhood, so. You know, we used to do a lot of things with Zulu, and Zulu sort of, you know, had this whole thing going on with the Ball Busters, and, you know, they were like basically, you know, making sure that we were able to move around, and, you know, we did these shows at the Roxy, so I used to hear Islam play a lot, so I was always at the Roxy, checking him and sharpening my DJ skills, because for me, I was making money on my DJing as well. So I started traveling, doing gigs in Boston, Paris, you know, Chicago, the Smart Bar, and it was a perfect job for me. You know, I was able to make money. I was able to, you know, work on my painting, you know, so at night I would just play all kinds of music, house music, reggae, you name it.
Got it. So much like Fabel, you were a triple threat. You had multiple ways to express yourself.
Yes.
Right?
Yes,
And what I love about what you're saying beyond that is you're mentioning your neighborhood, your community, also having these individuals. And so on the wall to my right, you have Ken Swift, which you mentioned. You have Doze, which you mentioned. You have Fable here. You have Wiggles, which Fable mentioned.
Yeah, right.
You have Frosty, which you just mentioned with that incredible story of the swings and the acrobatics. And so these are your friends.
Right.
These are your peers.
Right.
And so you guys are collaborating in music, you're collaborating in dance, you're collaborating in bombing, you're collaborating in making fashion, guys, and let's say for you in the stories that you're saying, how did you just get discovered and how did you start to travel around the world?
Well, I had a gallery that a lot of famous artists were showing, like Dondi, Futura, Ramelzi. Ramelzi was actually the first one to sort of take me under his wing, and he took me to a collector and told this lady, buy this painting. You know, so that for me really got me into doing canvases and, you know, trying to do exhibitions. But I sold a lot of pieces in a one-man show with the Yaki Kornblit Gallery. So, you know, that was a game changer for me, because when I was in art and design, I had to get special permission to go out there and do it, and, you know, write a report on what I did out there, and, you know, the whole gallery experience.
So wait a minute, you're telling me that you're in art and design high school,
Right.
and you're doing a show somewhere in Europe?
Yeah, Amsterdam. I was, you know, just a young teenager. You know, I was about 17 years old, so, you know, it was the best experience, you know, to get a one-man show in Europe. So that really inspired me to work harder and, you know, just keep producing paintings, and, you know, it was a great experience to have a show over there.
So I wanted to bounce back to Fabel. When did you sort of quote unquote get discovered outside of your community? Like, how did you, or when did you go out beyond the city?
My first international gig technically was to Canada. We went to Montreal. So that was 1982. So Grand Mixer DST, now known as Grand Mixer DXT, who's a DJ and a B-boy, by the way. And just for the record, I'm a DJ also. I have thousands of records I get down. And Wiggles, Ken Swift, myself, and Wiggles' nephew, we had a group called Taino Tactics. We were rhyming. And this is like 2. And we actually did like a little mini tour as Taino Tactics. And a lot of people came out because they knew us as dancers, but they were like, what, you guys rhyme too? So we're quadruple threats, or even more, you know, with the fashion, etc. Just had to throw that in there. So Grand Mixer DXT, formerly known as Grand Mixer DST, for those who don't know who that brother is, you know, he did the scratching on Herbie Hancock's Rocket, you know, vit, which was, you know, a major breakthrough with, you know, this jazz artist. So D was like, I want you to come with me to Canada, to Montreal. And we did that. It was, you know, me, it was MC Easy G, Booski, who was kind of like an Infinity rapper, down with the Infinity rappers. Electric Fish, another Electric Boogie guy. You know, 2 carloads of us. And then he was collaborating with musicians, Grand Mixer DXT. So that was my first trip, 1982. Then 1 week after graduating from High School of Art and Design, Mr. Freeze and I went to Paris to help promote Celluloid Records, because Celluloid Records gave Futura 2000 a single, you know, Lenny, he did a single. Phase 2 did, you know, the Roxy, a single. DST, you know, Grand Mixer DST, he did a single. Bernard Fowler, you know, did, you know, do this, Fat Five Freddy and B-side with Change the Beat. So Futura, D, Mr. Freeze, and I went to promote these records. So we were in Paris doing that, and then we bounced into Corsica and did some stuff there.
What was it like in Paris? What happened?
Oh my God. Well, mind you, I was 18 years old, 1 week fresh out of high school. I still don't speak much French at all. I stood out like a sore thumb. I wore a complete leather outfit, a leather blazer, a leather chauffeurman hat, leather pants, black leather Playboys, you know, B-boy down, you know. like gangster b-boy down. And so even at customs, they were like, "Who's this guy?" And then they read my last name, and they were like, he goes, "Do you know what your last name is?" Means in French. I said, "No, what?" He says, "No good." Pardon, right? But except this missing the S. So I look at the guy and I'm like, "Oh, you're gonna let me in or what?" Yeah, go ahead, have a nice day. So from the beginning, and then of course Mr. Freeze wasn't at the airport. It started off like a train wreck. But then, we eased into it. Some of the gigs fell through. So Freeze and I were actually dancing in the streets to make money in Châtelet, the little coffee shops and all that. We'd get busy out there dancing and collect the money, and that's how we survived for a little while. And then some of the gigs started happening, and then it was an amazing experience. So, in fact, I have this on display at the Revolution of Hip Hop, a T-shirt that Futura did for me, Fabel, and then I have a drawing from a black book that he tore out, Mr. Freeze meets Fable. So it's two characters. So I kept that all these years, and then on the top he wrote Corsica, because that one he did when we were in Corsica.
So how did the public receive you?
Oh, they loved us. They were bugging out. Like some of it was, believe it or not, because of the military bases. Some Americans, either from the West Coast or New York, would go into their clubs, and even way before we got there, and get busy. So they had a little idea of what it was. Some of them were trying to dance and do, art, aerosol art and rhyme and all that. But when they saw us, they were blown away, of course. And then right after that, it was like domino effect. I came back home, then, I was part of Rocksteady, but I also became part of the Magnificent Force. So we were featured in Beat Street. It's one of the main groups featured in Beat Street as dancers. Before we did Beat Street, Wiggles and I became members of the Magnificent Force, and our next trip was, I think, to the Berlin Jazz Festival in '83. We did the Berlin Jazz Festival and the Zurich Jazz Festival. At the Berlin Jazz Festival, it was being televised, live, and Harry Belafonte happened to be in Germany at the time and saw us on TV and said, "I want those guys," and told his people. That was pretty much our audition. We didn't have to audition. He was like, "I want them for this movie." His Beat Street was, Mr. Belafonte's vision. And so that's how we wound up on Beat Street. And then it was one gig after another, flying all over the world.
DC was
yeah.
a perfect opportunity. We were able to.
Wait, back up 1 second. Did you have
Beat
something
Street.
to do with Beat Street?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So what
yeah.
did you have to do with Beat Street?
I'm Ramo's father. Well, I took Ramo around. I showed him how to piece, so he could, he was an actor. He wasn't a writer. He wasn't an artist. So I would take him to the tunnels, and we would go into the underground, and, used to take him to that abandoned station where in our neighborhood we had, and, we went to one side and came out the other, and then we did some tags there, and then we went to the school, and I had him practice on a piece. But I did a lot of designing for him as well. Like I did all the throw-ups, that iconic, famous throw-up of Ramo. That was me.
Amazing.
That was me.
That's